Make me a host when you get a chance.
Got it.
Thank you.
And we are now live.
Okay, welcome everybody. It's great to have everyone with us this evening. My name is Ben Max. I'm the editor of Gotham Gazette. We have what should be a very interesting and substantive debate tonight in the Democratic primary for New York's 9th Congressional District. If you are watching us on Zoom somehow and you want to be over on Facebook, you should move over to Facebook, where you can stream the debate at facebook.com /PAYSUSA on Facebook and stream it there. I think most people are finding us on Facebook at one of a couple of different channels there. Again, I'm Ben Max, editor of Gotham Gazette. You can find us at gothamgazette.com, but not during the debate, of course. And please do participate during the debate. If you want to add to the conversation, you can do so on Twitter. You can use the hashtag NY9, the number 9, NY9 debate. You can find me at @TweetBenMax. And of course, all the candidates are on social as well. We have 4 of the 5 candidates with us tonight, and I will introduce them right before it's their turn to speak very shortly. The 9th Congressional District, of course, is in Brooklyn and includes parts or all of a number of neighborhoods that I'm not going to list now. If you're tuning in, you're probably familiar with at least some, if not all of them, and the district, and hopefully getting ready to participate in the vote in this primary, which is only open to Democrats. Early voting begins June 13th and goes through June 21st. You can find your early voting poll site if that's something you want to participate in. And primary day is June 23rd, quickly approaching. But of course, all New York voters are eligible to vote absentee this June, so you can take advantage of that as well. We are, of course, all focused right now on twin crises of the coronavirus pandemic and questions around police and racism and brutality that have led to many protests here in New York City and around the country. And we will address both of those issues and crises during this debate. And we will also talk about other important issues as the candidates running for the Democratic nomination in the 9th Congressional District engage in what should be a substantive conversation. So I want to thank the sponsors, and they're each going to give a quick introduction about those organizations. And we're going to start with South Central Brooklyn United for Progress and David Goldberg.
Hi. So South Central Brooklyn United for Progress is a grassroots group of individuals who live, work, and attend school in Southern Brooklyn or Central Brooklyn. We have members stretching from Prospect Park South to Sheepshead Bay and Sunset Park to Flatbush. We were founded in early 2017, recognizing that there are needs within our neighborhoods that are not being met and diverse and underrepresented voices that deserve amplification. We advocate for transparent communication by elected officials who must be held accountable to all their constituents, regardless of voter eligibility. We promote progressive policies and legislation that will improve the lives of all Southern and Central Brooklyn residents. Our recent actions have included advocacy for police reform, endorsing and phone banking in the 51st Assembly District, and continuing advocacy for the New York Health Act. We're excited to be here.
Thank you, David. And now let's turn to a representative from the Pakistani American Youth Society, Kashif Hussain.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kashif Hussain. I'm the co-founder of Pakistani American Youth Society, also known as PAYS. PAYS unites the community by providing a central communal space for meetings and activities. We encourage engagement by organizing town hall events, workshops, and open discussions with community leaders, members, and local merchants. And we strive to help our community rise by providing a safe space for building professional networks, offering opportunities for leadership development, and promoting access to professional and social opportunities. Our central office is in Central Brooklyn, and we have satellite offices in all 5 boroughs. As part of PAYS environmental justice advocacy, PAYS has opened its Newkirk Community Garden to all neighbors. PAYS actively partners up with Families for Safe Street and Transportation Alternatives to advocate for safer streets, open streets, and expansion of bike lanes in the city of New York. During COVID-19 crisis in past 50 days, PAYS and its coalition partners have served 55,000 plus freshly cooked hot halal meals citywide addressing food insecurities, handing out surgical masks, and distributing Census 2020 material in 5 languages throughout the city while working with multiple federal, state, and local elected officials. We're extremely excited to partner with South Central Brooklyn United for Progress and Brooklyn Movement Center in bringing another quality candidate debate forum tonight. We're looking forward to hearing from all congressional candidates tonight.
Thank you, Kashif. And from the Brooklyn Movement Center, Antonine Pierre.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Antonine Pierre, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Brooklyn Movement Center. So for those of you who may not have heard of the Brooklyn Movement Center, BMC is a Black-led direct action community organizing group in Central Brooklyn, which we refer to as Bed-Stuy and Crown Heights. And we're working to win improvements and build organizing campaigns that build power in Central Brooklyn. And we're excited to be a part of tonight because we're excited to be doing civic engagement work and really having people think about what does power look like? What does it look like to build power? And how are we in conversations with those in our community that want to represent our power?
Thank you, Antonine. And finally, in terms of the host groups, introductions from Greater Prospect Heights Mutual Aid, Crystal Hudson.
Thanks, Ben. I'm Crystal Hudson. I'm with Greater Prospect Heights Mutual Aid, which is a network of neighbors in Prospect Heights and surrounding neighborhoods, connecting our neighbors with one another during this time of extraordinary uncertainty, and more recently, unprecedented organizing in solidarity with the movement for Black Lives. I founded the mutual aid group in March as the pandemic was escalating and the city moved quickly to shutting down. Greater Prospect Heights Mutual Aid has turned into a network of mutual support, communication, local accountability, and resource connection. Our work is founded on core principles of mutual aid that we learn from people of African descent and people who are indigenous and native to the United States. Principles like changing our neighborhood require that we change the culture around us. People have the right to self-determination, and we must privilege and respond to the needs of folks experiencing the most vulnerability. Together, we've worked to organize almost 400 neighbors in our community, and most recently, we issued a letter to the mayor with over 1,000 sign-ons from our local neighbors and community organizations, because our neighborhood has become a hub of NYPD aggression, ensuring that we can amplify broader demands to defund the NYPD and self-determine what safety means for us and our community. And we're very pleased to be a part of this debate tonight.
Thank you, Crystal. All right, so we're going to get to our candidates now. Thank you to all the co-hosting organizations and to the folks that introduced them. Obviously, this debate is an opportunity for a larger audience to hear from the candidates hoping to represent the congressional district in Congress starting in the next session. But it's also, of course, an important opportunity to learn more about organizations that are doing real work, real on-the-ground work in the district. And so hopefully, if anyone's unfamiliar with any of these 4 co-host groups, please look up more information on them and get involved as you see fit. So for the candidates here, let's get going. We're going to move into opening statements in just 1 more minute. Joining us here tonight, we have the incumbent, Representative Yvette Clarke, and we have 3 of the 4 challengers who will be on the ballot. They are Adem Bunkedekko, Lutchi Gayot, and Isiah James. Chaim Deutsch will be on the ballot, but did not respond to invitations to join this debate or others. And so we have 4 candidates with us here tonight for what should be a really good and important discussion just ahead of when early voting starts, as I said, on June 13th, and absentee balloting has already begun. So the rules real quickly, we're going to do 1 minute opening statements, and then we're going to have about a half a dozen questions. We'll see how many we can get to, where when each question is read, mostly by one of the members of the host organizations, candidates will have about 1.5 minutes to answer the question. And I will at times jump in to ask a follow-up or a clarification. So candidates, please don't be surprised if I jump in to ask you to clarify something or to follow up with a specific example of something if something you're saying maybe is a little bit vague. And if somebody mentions a different candidate, we'll probably give that candidate about 20 or 30 seconds to respond to a direct criticism, but hopefully we'll avoid too much of that type of back and forth. And once we get towards the end of our event at about 8:25, we will go to 1 minute closing statements for each of the candidates. So everybody's going to get a chance to answer all of the questions, except there is one round of questions where the host groups have designed a specific question for each candidate, and that'll be towards the end. So without further ado, I've gone for the opening statements in alphabetical order by last name, and then we will switch up which candidate speaks first each round. So that means for opening statements, we're going to have Mr. Bunkedekko, Representative Clarke, Mr. Gayot, and Mr. James in that order. And then as we go into the first question from one of our host group members, Ms. Clarke will then answer first in that round and so on. So I will give everybody those prompts when to answer the question, but we're going to move to opening statements now, starting with Mr. Bunkedekko. Please begin with your 1 minute opening statement.
I want to thank all the groups for inviting us to have this important conversation. I'm Adem Bunkedekko. I'm the son of 2 war refugees. I often give a much more deeper story about my background in terms of who I am and what I've been about. But you know, I think it's quite simple given the times that we live in. I'm a Black man who grew up in this city and is frustrated with what kind of leadership we've had over the course of the last decade, in particular in Washington, when it comes to the issues that have been at the forefront in our community, as we are now talking about policing reform. It is my existence, being someone, a Black person who has been stopped and frisked, who has friends who've been stopped and frisked and had to go to Rikers as a result, who've had folks in our community and friends and neighbors and the like suffer as a result of the inequalities in our criminal justice system. But I've spent the last 10 years trying to help folks in our community, whether it's at the Bed-Stuy Restoration Corporation, helping single moms keep their children out of trouble, whether it's at the Brooklyn Community Services, helping folks who are formerly incarcerated try to find a way back into society. And we're all fed up. We're exhausted with what has been going on. And Ms. Clarke has done nothing over the course of her tenure in order to improve the situation that we have had here now for decades. And to me, that is a failure of leadership and a failure that needs to go. And that is what is on the table on June 23rd. And I look forward to having a meaningful conversation about that.
Thank you. And that brings us to Representative Clarke for your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Ben. And thank you to both the South Brooklyn United for Progress and Pakistani American Youth Society for gathering us for this debate and conversation this evening. I am Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, and I was born and raised in the 9th District of New York. The work that I do is extremely meaningful. It's a privilege and an honor to serve the people who have served you, who have raised you in your community. You know, I listen to my opponents in this race, and it's as though they're not aware of sort of the congressional dynamics that my tenure was under. And I want to just share that with everyone so that we put everything in context. You know, I happened to be elected to Congress when George Bush was president, and we took the House for the first time. And that was a great opportunity to make sure that the voices of the people of the 9th District of New York and all of its diversity was actually heard in Washington, D.C. Fast forward, the Tea Party takes over. President Obama's elected 8 years in the minority, 8 years in the minority, stopping bad things from happening, fighting to make sure that our voices are heard as the Tea Party ran the House of Representatives. Fast forward, we're back in the majority. I'm in leadership thanks to the support and the re-election that this community has given me. I have not forgotten from whence I've come. I'm here to fight, and I look forward to this evening's debate. Thank you so very much for having me.
Thank you. And for an opening statement, Mr. Gayot.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you to all the sponsors as well. My name is Lutchi Gayot, and I am also born and raised in East Flatbush, Brooklyn. My family's from Haiti. They immigrated to this country back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And I'd like to just introduce myself to you and also add on to what the representative just said. Because me, the way I see it, I don't see it as if it's her fault. I just see it as Congress's fault in general. I feel the people who are running this country in general are not doing what they're supposed to do in order to make this country move forward. For instance, if I ended up in Congress, if I couldn't get a bill through Congress, I would use the power of my seat to bring resources into the community. Because I understand that sometimes it is hard to force legislation through because you have a Congress that's constantly fighting each other. But with that seat, if you cannot get anything through Congress, there is no reason why you can't use the resources that you have in order to bring more into your community. So I'm happy to be here in this debate, and hopefully we get to continue on this conversation about how each one of us can bring more resources and more innovative ideas into Brooklyn.
Thank you. And on to you, Mr. James, for opening statement.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you to all the organizing groups who put this together. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Isiah James, 33 years old. I'm an activist, an organizer, and a disabled veteran. But more importantly than that, I'm a Black man living in America today. What you've heard tonight from our current representative was things are hard. Things are difficult. That is not acceptable. The Civil Rights Bill was hard. The Voting Rights Bill was hard. Ending slavery was hard. Things are hard, but people who put in the hard work get them done. Over the last 14 years, by every measurable metric, Black people in our community are doing worse. Working people in our community are doing worse. Education's unaffordable. Healthcare is non-existent. Housing is through the roof. Tonight, you're gonna hear a lot of ideas, but I want you to parse through the Wall Street speak. I want you to parse through the Congress speak and find the truth. I look forward to a very robust debate with my opponents, and I thank you for having me.
Thank you. And so we're going to go into our first round of questioning. I'm going to kick it to Antonin Pierre again in a moment, but just so folks have the order straight, this round we're starting with Representative Clarke, and then we're going in the same order, but Mr. Bunkedekko, you will then speak last this round. So Representative Clarke, you'll answer first, and over to you, Antonin.
Great, thanks, Ben. So this question is about police accountability, which is obviously on everyone's minds right now, and one of the core issues that the Brooklyn Movement Center works on. So how would you see your role as a member of Congress representing this district in reining in, defunding, and demilitarizing police? What measures would you address? What measures would you include to address the issues of police violence and institutional racism against Black people? And how do we hold municipalities accountable from a federal standpoint?
Well, let me first of all say that there is great movement in Washington, D.C. I am so proud of the work that I'm doing with the Congressional Black Caucus to introduce a suite of legislation that deals with everything from guaranteed immunity, which has been a way in which our officers have been able to disguise their wrongdoings. It opens up transparency to the defunding and demilitarizing of the police departments by, first of all, stopping the program that enables the military to make these transfers to various communities around the city, or excuse me, around the nation. And then finally, to make sure that we are adding into this a shifting of funding, federal funding to federal agencies, to the types of programs that help to heal communities, whether it's dealing with the COVID crisis or dealing with the economic disparities that have certainly been highlighted by everything that we have seen as a result of this. Let me close by saying a couple of things. One, I am certain that the protests that we are seeing across this nation and around the world are yielding dividends. I want to encourage those protests to continue. That movement in our communities has made it possible, now that we are in the majority in the House of Representatives, to pass groundbreaking legislation that will transform criminal justice and policing as we know it. On a local level, I took it upon myself to gather colleagues to call out 2 officers who actually are stationed in this district, have been terrorizing the people of Brownsville. And as I found out about this and then realized that these officers that I had really complained about were the same officers that shoved Miss Zayer to the ground on the first evening of protest at the Barclays Center, Miss Danya Zayer. I held a press conference at One Police Plaza, and I called this out. I spoke directly to the mayor and to the police commissioner through that press conference and independently of it.
Thank you.
And we saw swift action that has removed both the commanding officer and the officer who pushed Ms. Zayer down. One is being suspended. One has been taken away from that precinct. We now have a new Black police commanding officer at the 73rd precinct. That is action. That is what our community calls for. And I have the experience in leadership that makes that possible.
Mr. Gayot, same question to you.
All right, here we go. Yes. When it comes to
By the way, if anybody needs a question reread by one of our panelists, don't be afraid to ask. We can kick it back to the panelists, but go ahead.
No problem. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Yes, when we talk about police brutality, I understand you could go into one police station and have one person fired, but what you need to do is go to the core. And when you go, for you to go to the core, you have to go to, I would say, the mayor, the police commissioner, and you also have to go to whoever the local legislators are, and along with the police union. Me, as a union person myself, I understand that the unions are put in a position to protect the people who are tied to the union. And there are agreements with the union, between the union and the police department, that dictates what happens when a police officer acts badly. So what we need to do is sit down with the union, sit down with the mayor, the commissioner, everyone who's involved, hash out a type of policy that would put the police officers in a position where they are immediately held accountable based off of that contract. So we make a move like that, that I think will immediately spread the justice, if that's what we want to call it, across the city in one city. If we're gonna go to every single police station and fire people, it will take us 100 years to get it done. Again, we need smart, fast, innovative ideas to get things done immediately. So I don't even understand why we're not sitting with the unions right now, having that conversation. So again, if we want to be in a position to where we want to lead this community, then we have to come with the type of leadership that gets things done quickly.
Just in your last few seconds, anything you want to mention on the federal congressional level that you would pursue?
Yes, absolutely. In terms of the federal and congressional level, we do need to put federal legislation in place that is tied to the financing that goes down to the states and eventually to the local municipalities. I think we need to tie legislation to that money that will protect constituents, or rather protect people, especially people of color, from racism and from being targeted or experiencing bias from a police department. So I think we should tie some sort of legislation to the money. That way they behave properly.
Thank you.
That's what I would do.
Go to Mr. James, same question.
Thank you for the question. Anthony, can you please repeat the question, because it was so long ago since I heard it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is Zoom Live. So it's a police accountability question, which is a core issue that the Brooklyn Movement Center works on. And the question is, how would you see your role as a member of Congress representing this district in reining in, defunding, demilitarizing police? What measures would you include to address the issues of police violence and institutional racism against Black people? And how do we hold municipalities accountable from a federal standpoint?
Thank you for the question. So the federal government has a large role to play in this. We need to end the 1033 program, which allows surplus military equipment to be sold to states like New York, and that filters down into places like New York City. Our criminal justice system isn't broken. It was designed as a racist system. You cannot say you want to change a racist system. You have to dismantle that racist system. So there's a few things we need to do. In our criminal justice system, we need to end the war on drugs, which has disproportionately targeted Black and brown bodies. We need to end for-profit prisons in this country, because if we have a for-profit motive for locking people up, we're always going to lock people up. Right now, the mayor and the city have plans to build 5 new jails in the boroughs. Who do you think they're going to fill those jails with? People that look like me and you and folks in our community. That's what we need to do. We need to take, Congresswoman Clarke said she held a press conference and got 2 officers suspended or moved or changed precincts. We've seen that all over this country where officers hop from precinct to precinct and police department to the police department, carrying out terror. No, the NYPD needs to be defunded. Police departments all over this country need to be defunded. Right now, our city's police budget is $5.6 billion, billion with a B. Yet schools are struggling. Nursing homes are struggling. We need to allocate federal resources to things like in our community and take that money away from the police. The police budget needs to be cut, and the federal government can put forth legislation to do that. Anytime there is a shooting of an unarmed person in this country, that officer needs to be immediately fired and charged, and I'll tell you why. I was a soldier. I've been to war 3 times. If I had shot an unarmed civilian while I was in Iraq or Afghanistan, there would be I would not be suspended for 5 weeks while we're looking at it. I would have been arrested for a war crime. And our police officers on our streets across America are committing crimes every single day. So the federal government has a large part to play in this.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bunkedekko, over to you. Oh, just make sure you unmute yourself. Yep.
Okay, there you go. Look, I think we've tied on this. I've spoke about this in a serious way, even during the last debate, which was, look, first, what we need to do is demilitarize the police. That is first and foremost. Weapons caches that are accessed from the Pentagon should not be going to police forces all across the United States. In 2014, Ms. Clarke voted to keep that going. There is a bill that an amendment to the bill, the Grayson Amendment, that she put forward where we could have ended this. And she continued to vote for that. And that is, I think, obviously not the direction that we need to go to. So to expect Ms. Clarke to all of a sudden now be the person who's going to help demilitarize our police is just not the right step forward. The next is obviously defunding the police. Look, we have got police in schools all across this city. I went to public schools in this city. I saw new NYPD. We could be investing in social workers. We could be investing after school programs. We could be investing in the devices and tools that could allow for Black and brown children who clearly couldn't be able to learn during the COVID crisis because they didn't have access to those equipment. We could have been given that to them. Then I believe qualified immunity needs to end. If police officers are killing Black folks, they need to be held accountable and sued by their families. And that needs to be put forward in a serious way. This is what the federal government needs to be doing. And Ms. Clarke continues to say, well, I'm now in the majority. She was in the majority when Barack Obama was president and the Democrats controlled both the House and the Senate. And we didn't hear a word about criminal justice from Ms. Clarke. And this community is disproportionately impacted by police and the miswrongs of police. I grew up here in this city. I remember Amadou Diallo. I remember Eric Garner. I remember Sean Bell. And for Black folks in this city, we have consistently been forgotten about. And in Washington, we have been forgotten about. And on June 23rd, we can change that. And that's what we intend to do.
Apologies. Ms. Clarke, Representative Clarke, you were named a couple of times there. Do you want to respond to anything specific in just in a few seconds?
Yes, I did. Yes, I would. First of all, most of what my opponents have stated are best handled at the municipal level and the state level. Because across this nation, you have different constructs for police departments, and they are managed from the state and municipal level. We can set guidelines through the Department of Justice. We can also do consent decrees to monitor the activities and provide best practices, but it is not our responsibility to shift funding when the city council shifts funding. And many of the city council members of the city of New York are talking about that as we speak. Let me then say that he's absolutely correct. I was in one session when I was in the majority with President Barack Obama as president. And in that session, we passed the first ever sweeping reform to criminal justice. And it's called the First Step Act. I was a very loud proponent, very strong gatherer of co-sponsors that took that bill over the hill. So, I think that's great. Certainly encouraged our president to do the reforms that he did as he walked through federal prisons to talk about the inequities that are taking place, have stood with our communities through and through. And mind you, I grew up in this district and I have been on the front lines of each and every movement.
We're gonna go to our
Since
next.
I'm sorry, Ben, but we have to understand, this is what the federal government.
It's gonna come back to you. If you want to take a couple seconds on your
Absolutely.
answer, you go ahead.
Absolutely.
But I want to make sure we get to, we have about 5 big topics we want to get to. So so our next question is, I'm kicking to Ellen Belofsky for a question about healthcare. Go ahead, Ellen.
Yes, thank you. So the COVID pandemic has exposed in a visceral way the life-threatening flaws in both our healthcare system and also in our public health infrastructure. How would you address these twin problems in Congress?
And we're starting with Mr. Gayot and going in the same order again, but starting in with a different person each time here. So Mr. Gayot, you're up.
Yes, thank you very much. Do you mind just rephrasing the question, please?
Okay, the COVID pandemic has exposed in a visceral way the life-threatening flaws in both our healthcare system and our public health infrastructure. How would you address these twin problems in Congress?
All right, I understand. Well, the way I would address this problem is by introducing us to technology. Technology would have helped us immensely during the COVID crisis. I think towards the middle part of it, we really started using technology such as the telemedicine and things of that nature, which did help. But I feel that we're not, I would say we're not up to par with technology in terms of the way our system is in our hospitals. You walk in, you have to go through triage, sit there for several hours, and then after that, you go and see someone who types things into a computer, and then you get to see a doctor. By that time, hours and hours have gone by and a lot of money has been lost. I feel if we implement technology into our systems so that we could stay on top of the building, the people, who's infected, where were they infected, who did they infect along the way, we'd be able to, one, track the infection a lot better, and 2, would have been able to put a lot more resources into work a lot quicker. For instance, you saw how Governor Cuomo was speaking on TV about we didn't have enough respirators and that we need to buy something like 17,000 respirators for $25,000 a piece. Why didn't we have a system already in place that would be able to supply us that type of equipment fairly quickly instead of us having to go to China in order to do it? So I think implementing technology is very important, and also just being ready to preempt any sort of a pandemic or a national emergency that we have. We simply weren't prepared.
Mr. James, over to you.
Thank you so much for the question. So the down and dirty answer is because we have a for-profit healthcare system. Anytime you take something and make it for-profit, you're automatically saying that a certain subset of our population will not be able to afford it. And when it comes to things like housing and education and healthcare, these things that are human rights, a for-profit motive, as we see, does not work. Even before coronavirus hit, we had 30, 40 million uninsured brothers and sisters in this country. And now we see that healthcare tied to employment. Now we have an additional 40 million on top of that. For our healthcare infrastructure, we need a single payer healthcare system in this country. We've talked about it for 100 years in this country. Out of the 33 industrialized nations across this world, 32 provide healthcare. The only one that doesn't is the one you and I are sitting in. So we need to move away from this for-profit healthcare system. That's number one. Number two, coronavirus didn't cause these problems, but it exposed them. In our community, our public hospitals are defunded. Just right now, it was announced Governor Cuomo is going to take $400 million away from hospitals in New York State. That is what I'm talking about. We have leaders in Washington and in city government and state government who do not put the needs of the people first. Now, my opponent, Ms. Clarke, takes hundreds of thousands of dollars from big pharma, big insurance, the Medicare industry. Now ask yourselves, somebody who speaks out of both sides of their mouth, how are they going to do right by the people? I don't stand up for the Fortune 500. I stand up for the Fortune list 40 million.
Thank you. We're going to give Ms. Clarke just 20 seconds or so if you want to respond to that about the campaign donation specifically.
Well, what I want to respond to is the fact that I've brought over $400 million into Central Brooklyn through Medicare waivers and through the CARES Act. And this has undergirded the healthcare infrastructure that we now have called the One Brooklyn Health Network, which covers the hospitals of Brookdale, Kingsbrook Jewish, as well as Interfaith Medical Center.
Thank you.
These are at the heart of what we need to do.
Mr. Bunkedekko on the original question. Go ahead.
Look, we've got to think about this in three phases. I think one, we have to respond to the crisis at hand. We have got Central Brooklyn has been the hardest hit among all of the boroughs in terms of COVID. And so we have got a number of hospitals, Brookdale, Kings County, Downstate, Kingsbrook Jewish, Maimonides, that have been heavily overrun, and they have not had the help that they need. In fact, as I pointed out in the previous debate, we got police officers looking like Iron Man out here, and then we've got folks wearing garbage bags and the like trying to treat patients with COVID. So the first thing we need to ensure is that we're making sure that everyone is getting hazard pay for essential workers. My mom is a frontline worker. They deserve hazard pay. Second, I think what's important is making sure that we are canceling rent for a lot of folks who are finding it difficult to live during this crisis. That is first and foremost. It was already difficult enough to live in Central Brooklyn. That is what our campaign has been about this time and the previous one. And that's what we need to push forward. Undocumented immigrants need to have access to public resources and benefits and healthcare. The second phase of what we need to think about is recovering. It is clear that we have now 14% unemployment throughout the United States. And that is going to be a huge addition that we need to, folks are not going to have access to healthcare because they lost their employment. We need to guarantee healthcare for all of those folks. And then I think the third is reimagining this entire public health infrastructure. One, we need to move toward a single payer healthcare system. Warren Buffett said it best. It makes economic sense and it morally fits with who we are as a people. And if we're going to be able to fight back in another pandemic like this again, we need to make sure that people are going to be covered all across and not have to worry about whether or not they're employed or they're undocumented, if they're going to be able to access healthcare. That's how we're going to move the ball forward going post this, and how we reimagine all of the big challenges that we already had in Central Brooklyn that have added gasoline to a 5-alarm fire.
Thank you. And now, Ms. Clarke, a longer answer to the question on healthcare and the twin challenges of both the healthcare system and the public health infrastructure. Go ahead.
I'm sorry about that. I needed to unmute.
It's happening to all of us at least once.
Well, let me say that, this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. I am vice chair of the Committee on Energy and Commerce in the House of Representatives. And as a result of being reelected by the people of this district, my leadership has taken on a whole nother dimension. And as part of that responsibility, I had to help shepherd both the CARES Act and the HEROES Act. And it's as though some of my opponents have read the bill, but in that bill, we have already made provisions for hazard pay. We've made provisions for a new healthcare infrastructure that would come to the state of New York to enable us to really stand up a very robust public health infrastructure. I look at Medgar Evers College. I look at SUNY Downstate's medical school. I look at their School of Public Health. I look at all of our healthcare hospitals. I look at all of our clinics. I've spoken with all of our doctors who've been working on these disparities, the spread of infectious diseases and epidemiology in communities of color. And we have put together a local task force to make sure that as the federal funds flow, as I've had conversations with our governor and our mayor, we have reimagined what public health should be. The priority is making sure that those communities that were hardest hit by the COVID crisis, that were had the most infection and spread, will be the first recipients, will stand up this robust infrastructure. I'm so glad I was able to lead on that front. Also in Washington, D.C., I have been tasked as vice chair to make sure that we address disparities in healthcare across the entire jurisdiction of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. That's my role. That's the leadership that the people of this district have re-elected
Can I respond
me
since I was called
to.
out?
I didn't call anyone out, and I didn't finish
called out my
speaking.
point.
I didn't speak out,
Let's-
but I hadn't.
We're gonna move on to our next question because we want to get to our next topic. If you want to use a few seconds, you'll also have a closing statement, and we'll have plenty of time for everybody to say their piece as we keep going here. So let's move on. Our next question is going to come from Crystal Hudson, and we're going to start once she asks the question. We're going to start with Mr. James, then Mr. Bunkedekko, Ms. Clarke, Mr. Gayot. So over to you, Crystal.
Thank you. So the question is one pertaining to economics. Given the 40 million folks who are currently unemployed and many of those dealing with food insecurity and a lack of social services, what is your plan for supporting people who are out of work and need such resources? Are you considering a federal cancellation of rent? And what about small businesses?
Thank you so much, Crystal, for the question. So right now, until we get through this crisis, and even after, because the recovery is going to take a long time, we need a guaranteed universal basic income in this country of at least $2,000 for every person across the board. Not those who are millionaires and billionaires, but certain, if you make below a certain threshold, folks who actually need it. That's what we need. We need to invest in small businesses, particularly in our community. A lot of the businesses are Black-owned businesses that were the hardest hit. And the two bills that came before Congresswoman Clarke put out, it was a windfall for giant corporations, for the Los Angeles Lakers and Ruth Chris Steakhouse. We need to put forth legislation that puts businesses, small businesses and Black-owned businesses first. We need a $200 billion program right now, specifically for Black-owned businesses in our community. Another thing we can do to address the inequality that we saw that COVID peeled the layer back is we need to talk about, especially in Black communities, the reparations for Black communities. And to me, what does that look like? That means a systematic investment in communities of color and Black communities that have been disproportionately affected by racism in this country. That means an investment in Black businesses and Black colleges. That means an investment in diversionary programs from prisons and jails. That means re-enfranchising Black voters who have been, had the scarlet letter of a conviction on their record. That means removing or legalizing marijuana and ending the racist war on drugs. We need to reimagine how we look at business in this country, small business in this country, and Black business in this country, because for so long it has been forgotten. We don't need leadership that reacts in a crisis. We need leadership that is proactive, who has the lived experiences of growing up as a son of a woman who owned a Black business.
Thank you. We're going to go to Mr. Bunkedekko. Again, a reminder that if anybody needs to hear the question again, we'll kick it back to Crystal.
Yeah, please repeat, just so we can hear it.
Given the 40 million folks currently unemployed and many dealing with food insecurity and a lack of social services, what is your plan for supporting people who are currently out of work and need such resources? Are you considering a federal cancellation of rent? And what about small businesses?
I've already been on the record for cancellation of rent. And look, as I've pointed out, we have got to obviously respond to the crisis at hand. We have got a number of folks, particularly in our community, who are disproportionately impacted. And those two previous CARES Act bills were jokes. They did not do enough. The governor called it out himself. He said, look, this is not enough. He was expecting more from the cities and states delegation to Congress. What we need to put forward is obviously canceling rent, obviously making sure that we're providing stimulus funds to folks to continue to go through this crisis, because we don't know when the pandemic will actually end. And so we should not have folks who are out in the cold as a result. But also what I think we need to remember is the undocumented. My parents came here without status. And so if we've got a number of immigrants in our community who are worried sick about whether or not, if they get sick, if they go to the hospital, they can't access healthcare and they don't have a job, they're going to be out, left in the cold. And so we have to make sure that we're providing for that. But I also think, given that this district has the biggest chunk of public housing in the United States, arguably, from the Brownsville houses to the Van Dyke houses, we need to make sure we're fully funding NYCHA. We have got a COVID rate that is through the roof in public housing all across this city. And we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to fight for them, because they don't have a voice right now and they're worried.
Thank you. Ms. Clarke, obviously there's the larger question in hand, and then within that, there's been some comments about the quality, the comprehensiveness of the bills that have passed in response to the coronavirus crisis. So if you want to perhaps answer the full question at hand, but make sure to try to get to what you think of what's been passed so far and what else needs to be done.
Absolutely. First of all, let me just say that the next phase is the recovery phase. And so in that, we've put forth the HEROES Act, which has rent cancellation, which deals with the mortgage issue, deals with evictions, deals with making sure that we provide support for legal services, make sure that we also are creating funding for those who may be on the edge of having foreclosure on their properties. It's a very robust package. It also deals with food insecurity, which was an issue that one of my opponents raised. It also, again, has hazard pay. So that is sort of the recovery phase. It also, again, has a UBI type program. It's not UBI that I would have wanted to see in there, but we are making sure that we're continuing to provide a lifeline through unemployment and through direct benefit to people within our communities. It's stuck right now in the Senate, but the second CARES Act, that's what I wanted to get to. It actually did provide money for small minority women-owned businesses. As a matter of fact, they're getting that money right now as we speak, and the funding is still sitting there. There's over $100 billion that our businesses can access. Many have been accessing them through the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce. Others have been accessing them through smaller banks. And these are forgivable loans. That's the great thing about it. The SBA, Congresswoman Nydia Velasquez did a masterful job, because the Republicans who initiated these bills were only trying to make sure that they got their money to the well-connected. We did an end run. This second CARES Act is powerful. Now, let me say in closing, I understand we're going to be moving to a rebuilding phase. That's infrastructure. That's infrastructure. That's jobs. That's money for small businesses, and that is employment. We need to use every single one of these tools that we are bringing out of the House of Representatives, out of the Congress, to make sure that we redirect those funds to our communities.
Just quickly, one more thing for you, Representative Clarke. Is there anything that you and your Democratic colleagues in the House should be doing to try to put more pressure on the Senate to move on this next package?
Well, this is the thing about the protests that are taking place right now. That has translated to a threat to many of my Republican Senate folk who are on the edge and are losing ground. If we take over that Senate in the next election, it's on and popping, as the young people would say, because we now have an opportunity to make sure that every measure that we're talking about in terms of transformational change for our society is at hand. And I'm excited about that.
And let's go to Mr. Gayot for the final answer to Crystal's question. Go ahead.
Yes. On and popping. I'm going to hold your feet to the fire, Ms. Clarke, on UBI. Actually, I'd like to say that I'm glad that everyone else on the stage is now starting to see that a universal basic income is what this country needs. I've been talking about a UBI since way before COVID. I feel that is the direction that this country needs to head in terms of economics. I am a small business owner. I've run myself 2 small business storefronts over the past 12 years. I've employed dozens and dozens and dozens of employees from before the Affordable Care Act till after. So I actually experienced having to not being able to afford to give healthcare to where I was able to afford it for a little while. And then when the Affordable Care Act went through the roof, then I couldn't afford it anymore. So I feel that we need to revamp the whole entire way that we think about economics in this country, because right now it's almost as if we're going to try to rebuild this country using the same exact thinking process. And I think we need to take ourselves and look outside the box and definitely start pushing the UBI and also take away all this means testing for small businesses. I have 2 small businesses in East Flatbush right now that I'm helping with their PPPs and their SBAs. Even now, the kind of means testing that they have is making it impossible for these people to get money. Remember,
Thank you.
we were struggling from before COVID. We need a legislator to go into Congress and say, hey, stop with the means testing. These people need money, period. So
Thank you.
That is definitely what I would bring to Washington, D.C.
We're going on to our next question, our next topic. Mr. Bunkedekko is going to answer this first, and then again in our same order. And I'm going to introduce Jess Byrne.
Hi, so I am an elected representative of the Community Education Council for District 22, which largely overlaps with the Congressional District of New York 9. I also serve as the presiding officer / president of that council at this time. So I'm going to ask you a question on education. The Every Student Succeeds Act, the most recent authorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, is up for reauthorization after the 2020-2021 school year. What changes would you make to that act?
Thank you.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. It's okay. Yes. Here's what I would.
Sorry, Mr. Gayot. Mr. Bunkedekko is answering first here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, please. Mr. Bunkedekko, go ahead.
Yeah, could you elaborate on the act itself specifically? Sure.
Okay. So I'm sure somebody who works in Congress can elaborate more than I can. I'm mostly focused on local and state politics at this time. However, it is the act that is supposed to guarantee that every student at every level has equal opportunity and equal access to a well-deserved education.
Absolutely. So look, I think as someone who's a product of the New York City public school system, I am a fierce defender of public education. I not only agree that we should have that act, but I think there's a difference between de jure and de facto. And de facto is that we have the nation's most segregated school system here in New York City. And I was fortunate to obviously be a product of it, but there's two sides here. We've got one side of Prospect Park in which we have got white families who get to go to 321 and the like, and on the other side of Prospect Park in Crown Heights and Flatbush and the like, they do not have the funding necessary that they need to have, again, a great education. And so my plan, I'm the only one who's put out a plan on education. Ms. Clarke seemed to think that the federal government has no role to play in education. In fact, it does. It has a role to play because it has the power of the purse. It has money that it can incentivize school districts all across the United States to make sure that they're putting Black and brown children first. We have got some of the most under-resourced schools in our district in central Brooklyn. And that needs to change. And we can do that if we put federal power and teeth to making sure that kids have the same opportunities, not only in Park Slope, but in Crown Heights and in Brownsville and in East Flatbush and in Flatbush the like. So yes, to your point, yes, I would go vote for it, but we need to do more than simply just vote for that. We need to actually have real leadership. And
you mentioned having an education plan. Do you want to give us a couple of the key pieces of that?
Look, I think what the first point being is any school district that has lines that are not drawn to have integration, the federal government should cap funding to a school district that does that. That is the key parameter for us to make sure that we're pushing school districts all across. Because right now, that is the issue right now, is that in Brownsville and in Crown Heights, where I am, and in East Flatbush and in Flatbush, the kids do not have the access to public schools out in 321 in Prospect Heights.
We're going to go to Ms. Clarke on the larger issue of just to clear anything up for folks, this is the big reauthorization of education policy and education funding across the country under President George W. Bush. It was, the No Child Left Behind Act, and it morphs, but it continues to be the way that the federal government authorizes, makes education policy in a lot of ways and provides funding. Go ahead, Ms.
Absolutely. And I think we have a golden opportunity right now. We always have, but with the reauthorization, we can drill down even deeper. There are a couple of things that I'd like to see done in New York City and across this nation. That's to remove police from school buildings. We can start there so that children feel that they're in a wholesome and healthy and nourishing educational environment. As someone who attended all public schools in the 9th Congressional District, from elementary through high school, I received a top-notch education, right? We know that there has been divestment at the state level where school districts are funded from. There has been a protracted struggle, and we have lifted that up in Washington, D.C. It's called the Campaign for Fiscal Equity in Education that has been going on for a number of years. I've been at most of their protests, but I haven't seen any of my opponents there. Let me also say that through the federal government, we can bake in cultural competencies, a change in curriculum, and tie Title I monies to that. But we have to make sure that we continue to make sure that families have access to free lunches for their children, which is another part of this legislation. And in this time of food insecurity, they have been standing up. We have to reimburse our municipalities, which is also in the HEROES Act, who have been doing a yeoman's job in feeding families. But in terms of education, there has to be a cultural shift so that children can see themselves in the curriculum that they're being taught. And that's something we can modify within the new Reauthorization Act.
Mr. Gayot, over to you on education and changes you would want to see in federal education policy.
Yes, thank you. Well, for one, we need to stop turning the education system into an industrial complex. A lot of that money that comes from Washington, D.C. ends up in the hands of private corporations in many different ways, in terms of construction projects. In fact, there's a school over in Crown Heights where it's had a scaffold around it for years. The cost of that scaffold is millions of dollars, and they're not even doing any work. So we've got a lot of money getting wasted in that way. Now, I'd have to counter what Mr. Bunkedekko said, because the centerpiece of my campaign is education, because I want a World War II-like effort to bring the trades back into the schools. I did go to college, but I went and studied music business and coding and also political science. But at the end, I didn't have any marketable skills at the time when I was ready to go into the workforce, and I fell back on what I learned in high school, which was wood shop. And at my tender age, I guess it just coalesced into my mind. So I was really good with straight lines and cutting. And so I started a construction company, and so here I am. So I feel we need a World War II-like effort. Instead of refinancing the No Child Left Behind, which I think is terrible policy, I think we need to look at the local level, tie that money to the local level, because children from different communities learn in different ways. And we also need to put more technical training in our junior high and high schools in terms of how we formulate our curriculums. I believe that's how we're going to move the ball forward in terms of education, and putting the opportunities in the hands of children when they got to high school, so they could actually make a living without going to college if they decide to do so. Thank you.
Mr. James, your answer in the final one for this round.
Thank you so much. One of my opponents said I didn't have that he was the only one with an education plan. That is absolutely not true. My campaign was one of the first to put out a birth through 12 education plan, and then a free college education plan. My wife is a UFT member. She is a DOE teacher. So that's number one. I would like to correct that record. Number two, we're talking about fighting over the small pittance that the federal government gives to public education. Right now, our public education budget is $67 billion. Our defense budget is $790 billion. The bill that me and my team worked on right now is called ARIA, the American Reinvestment in Education Act. It calls for, across the board, a $200 billion reduction in defense spending. And you can do that when you don't take defense money from contractors. a $200 billion reduction in defense spending. And that money is allocated to schools in Brownsville and Crown Heights and Bed-Stuy, so they can use those funds to build the classrooms and build the space and reduce class sizes that we need. Another thing we can do, because the federal government has a large role to play in this, i.e. Brown versus Board of Education. Another thing we can do is have STEM programs for Black children and for Black and brown schools that have fallen way behind the curve when it comes to that area of technology, because our schools have been forgotten. So we also need to remove the vacuous charter schools who take money away from public education. Hundreds of millions of dollars are sucked away every year from the already small portion of public education funds. I am proud to say I'm the only one on this stage that doesn't take charter school money, and it's for a moratorium on charter schools.
You know what? We're going to go to our next round of questioning.
But I'd like to correct the record.
Just
one
one.
Because Mr. James mentioned that he's the only one who doesn't take charter school money. So I'd like to clarify that I'm not taking any money from any corporate interest or anything.
I just wanted to give.
I'm not taking any money from charter schools either. So people embellish, and it's ridiculous at this stage, right? It's ridiculous.
So
I hope that you go and look that up.
I wanted to actually give both Mr. Bunkedekko and Representative Clarke a chance to just take 30 seconds on charter schools. It's an issue that's come across our radar here in preparation for the debate in multiple ways. And just, that does relate back to the federal legislation in terms of how the federal government allocates funding. And if you want to just take, like I said, just about 30 seconds each on the issue of charter schools. Go ahead, Ms. Clarke, you have the mic right now, so we'll go to you and then Mr. Bunkedekko, 30 seconds.
Absolutely. I have always thought that the charter school provisions of ESEA were exploited by those who wanted to profit and experiment on Black children. Having said that, we have a number of public charter schools that are doing phenomenal work. Their original role was to serve as laboratories of different teaching styles that then could be gone into the general public school system. That has never occurred. And
Okay.
I have been a forceful, outspoken member of Congress saying that I am not in agreement with cohabitating charters in public schools, because the inequities that displays to the children is demoralizing.
Okay,
and I've never taken a cent from any charter school organizations at all, or individuals for that.
Go ahead, Mr. Bunkedekko.
So first off, Ms. Clarke is lying. So she just took a check from the Charter School Action Pack. I don't take money from charter. So let's let the record show that. Second,
it's a public organization.
Can I speak?
Go ahead.
Thank you. First, again, as I pointed out, Ms. Clarke took a check from the Charter School Action Pack. That you can look that up last quarter.
We'll let people look into that afterward. Okay.
So, yeah, they should look at it, because then they'll understand.
Ms. Clarke, please let Mr. Bunkedekko finish.
Thank you. Second, I also believe in the NAACP's moratorium on charters. That I think I've been on the record very publicly and clearly about. Third, I believe charters need to have their teachers need to have the right to unionize. Their teachers also they should not be able to cherry pick students, and they should not be a drain on public resources. But really, this debate actually distracts from the actual problem, which I highlighted already in the first question, which was we have an apartheid in our district, in that there are white families and white kids who get to go to great public schools, and then there are Black and brown families who have to make false choices. Trust me, nobody wants to have charters. My parents would have cut their arms off to send me to the best school possible. And that's what we need to do. We need to fully fund our public schools.
And where did you go to high school? And where did you go to high school?
Okay. First off, is Ms. Clarke going to continue to interrupt me or not? I earned a scholarship to go to boarding school.
Thank you. Okay, We're going to move on to our next round of questioning. I'm going to kick it over to Kashif Hussain for a question, and then we're going to start this round back with Mr. Bunkedekko, then Ms. Clarke, Gayot, James. Go ahead, Kashif.
Sure. I'm a son of the Pakistani immigrants that came here 3 decades ago. So the next question is a foreign policy question. This district has a terrifically diverse population, including immigrants and their descendants from Uzbekistan, Turkey, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the Caribbean, Russia, Mexico, etc., as well as a large Jewish population, many of whom have deep connections to the state of Israel, as well as those who oppose its policies. How would you keep abreast of the foreign policy issues your diverse constituency cares about and respond to their sometimes conflicting views?
Thank you. Mr. Bunkedekko, we're going to start with you. If you want to hear the question again at any point, we'll kick it back to Kashif.
Sure. So I just want to be clear about the question. So you're saying, how should we keep the perspectives of all of the folks in our community in mind as a member of Congress who would have to weigh in on foreign policy matters? Is that correct? So I think for us, it's very clear. Look, we have got a diverse district. We have got folks from sub-Saharan Africa to the West Indies, both on the Anglophone West Indies and the Francophone West Indies, from Southeast Asia to Pakistan, as was mentioned, and the like. What I believe we need to be important is Congress serves as a check on the executive, and we have an executive branch that is completely out of control when it comes to foreign policy. And so, as the son of 2 war refugees, our immigration policy is racist at this particular moment in time. My parents would have not been able to come to this country from a war-torn Uganda and been able to, my dad, who went to a detention center in Elizabeth, New Jersey, have his petition for asylum granted. So my upbringing and my success in life would have not been possible were it not for immigration. And that's what we need to push forward in a comprehensive matter. Look, we're going to have a rare opportunity, I believe, in the next Congress to be able to push real immigration. A real immigration bill that allows for the 11 million folks who have built lives here, who have children here, who have done everything that they are supposed to do to contribute to the well-being of the United States, and they deserve citizenship in this country, not tomorrow, but yesterday.
And just quickly, just directly, you know, we heard you definitely outline some of your immigration platform and viewpoint, but on the matter of how you sort of keep tabs on these various constituencies, is there anything you would pledge to do, or, you know, anything you would promise to do to try to make sure to know what those diverse communities are thinking about in terms of foreign policy?
Absolutely. I've outlined that I would have a town hall every month in a different part of the district to ensure that we are hearing from all of the folks all across this district.
Thank you.
And also have 2 separate offices, a northern and southern, that touches on all of the different parts that we have.
Okay,
we have a broad-based and diverse district.
Thank you.
I want to remember that it's there all the time.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Clarke, you're up. Oh, unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much. That was a very thoughtful question. You know, I have had the honor of representing this very diverse constituency, and as well as growing up here and growing up with the children of all of these immigrant communities. I've had the opportunity to sit down with the Pakistani community and listen to the challenges of those whose family members are living in Kashmir. I took that information because it spoke to my heart, and it spoke to the democratic values that we adhere to in the United States. And I was one of the first members to raise the issue of the issues that are plaguing the people of Kashmir, the repression that they've been living under. I had the opportunity to actually travel to Turkey to meet with the various parties just when Erdogan started cracking down on protesters. And so I've had the opportunity to sit down with pro-Erdogan and anti-Erdogan. And I understand that at the heart of it are the values that we hold that are democratic. And if you're going to jail different journalists, then you're going to hear from Congresswoman Yvette Clarke. On the issues of Israel, I've traveled to Israel on 4 separate occasions with both J Street and AIPAC. So I understand the diversity of the Jewish community that lives here. I let my conscience be my guide. I let my conscience be my guide. And I know that it is important because of the long-standing relationship between the United States and Israel that we have a bond. but that we also use our strength to help this nation to find a pathway to peace, which is critical, a two-state solution with a pathway to peace. I can talk about the Caribbean extensively because I've traveled there extensively. And I talk about the fact that we need a hemispheric approach to development, not allowing China to come into the Caribbean region and to essentially extort those developing nations. These are mid-level economies that are about to make first world status, but are now being encumbered. I've had to go to the IMF on behalf of Jamaica, and I was successful at getting their things organized. So I am in touch with every place that my constituents come from because they are so important to me, and I have lived and experienced the cultural richness of the people that I represent. I yield back.
Mr. Gayot?
Yes, thank you. In terms of foreign policy, one thing that comes to mind, Max, is we had that interview the other day, and you asked me about Palestine. And so I want to go ahead and really touch on that, because within our district, we have an enormous Jewish community, and we have an enormous Muslim community. And because we have these two communities, I feel when we go to Washington, D.C. to make these type of decisions, we definitely have to sit down and get the opinions of the people that we're supposed to be the proxies of. For instance, I would have never supported the Iran deal, because that put Iran in a position to where they could point more missiles at Israel, and in terms of what's going on with Israel and Palestine, that's a huge conversation to have. I couldn't even give you the exact answer to it because the intricacies that exist within that goes back thousands of years, so when it comes to the different parts of this community and foreign policy, it's definitely a conversation that needs to be had with the constituents, with the leaders in that community, because again, you are a proxy of those people. Imagine this, if we have an argument in Washington, D.C. over Palestine, I'd go into the district, speak to both the Jewish and the Muslim community, get their opinions, make it public. Maybe that could help the decision-making in Israel. So again, when it comes to foreign policy, we definitely have to sit down with the different leaders in our community in order to make those type of decisions in Washington, D.C.
And Mr. James.
Kashif, could you repeat the question, please?
Absolutely. This district has a terrifically diverse population, including immigrants and their descendants from Uzbekistan, Turkey, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the Caribbean, Russia, Mexico, etc., as well as a large Jewish population, many of whom have deep connections to the state of Israel, as well as those who oppose its policies. How would you keep abreast of the foreign policy issues your diverse constituency cares about and respond to their sometimes conflicting views?
Thank you for the question. You keep abreast, I would keep abreast of it by talking with the people. That is the best way to come out of Washington, D.C. and actually meet with the people. Since this campaign started, I've already committed to holding no less than 12 town halls a year when I'm elected, one Friday night and Saturday night, so our Jewish brothers and sisters will be able to attend. That's number one. Number two, when we talk about foreign policy, I have been on the other side of bad foreign policy decisions. I've been deployed to Iraq twice and Afghanistan once, got wounded for this country and almost died. Saw my brothers and sisters in arms die right next to me, all on a lie, all on a corporate lie. So I understand that foreign policy is a very critical issue for our nation. And I also understand that we must lead with diplomacy every single way. I've never shied away from the hard issues. So like one of my opponents, Mr. Gayot, talked about the Israeli and Palestinian issue. Listen, at any point in human history, when we have rockets flying one way and tanks rolling at another, we have failed as human beings on both sides. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that it's a very complicated issue, and I do not have all the answers. But I know one thing for sure. America must lead on this issue. We have the power to get both sides to the table. And it's time for us, especially for somebody who wants to represent Jewish brothers and sisters, Palestinian brothers and sisters, Muslim brothers and sisters, and Christian brothers and sisters. It's time to have a representative that stands up and leads and says, listen, folks in my community can find a way to get along. The United States of America must bring these parties to the table for peace.
Thank you. So we're actually going to move momentarily into closing statements. We're going to go start with Mr. Gayot and then go to Mr. James, Mr. Bunkedekko, and Representative Clarke. You have about a minute to give your closing statement. We have enough time to make these a little bit longer, maybe a minute and a half. So why don't we say a minute and a half for closing statements here? And if there's anything before you go into any type of stump closing, maybe there's one other lingering thing from the debate so far that you want to come back to or address, but we'll say a minute and a half for each candidate to close out here, and then we'll have one final message from one of our hosts, I believe. But Mr. Gayot, why don't you start us off, a minute and a half for a closing statement?
Thank you very much. In my closing statement, I just want to brush over everything that I've spoken about today. Starting with education, I just want to make it clear where I stand. I believe the education system that we have in many different parts of the country, including in New York City, is broken. I believe that the money that we spend doesn't go to the right places. Again, I feel like we need a World War II-like effort to bring the trades back into our schools, not only in construction skills, but also in robotics and AI, because no one in DC is speaking about robotics and AI, but they sure are in China and they sure are in Europe. We need that type of World War II-like effort to put our children in a position for success moving forward into the future. Secondly, I didn't get to speak much about housing. I don't think any of us got a chance to speak much about housing, but one part of my platform speaks about making rent tax deductible. Just like you have businesses who could deduct the cost of their rent, and you have homeowners who own homes that pay mortgage interest, they get to deduct that, but renters do not get that same benefit. So we need to update our tax code to include renters, so that renters could also write off the cost of their rent as a living expense. I think that's really important. We also brushed over a universal basic income. I believe, again, a universal basic income is going to be literally a centerpiece into the recovery of this country. As a small business owner who owns small business storefronts, I'm telling you, we are not going to go back to the same way we were before business-wise. So we need to rethink our economy in order for us to move forward, moving forward into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Mr. James.
Thank you, Ben, for being the moderator, and thank you for all the organizations that put this together and brought all of us together tonight. Tonight, you heard a plethora of ideas from 4 different candidates of how we move forward. We are on a precipice in this country of where we go. If we want leadership that's going to be reactionary when things happen, or do we want leadership that's going to be proactive and get things done? Not because they think it's the cool, sexy thing, but because they have these lived experiences. Do we want leaders who are going to fight for criminal justice because they know what it's like to look like a suspect when you walk out of the door as a 6'8" Black man? Do they want leaders who are going to fight for single-payer healthcare because their beautiful wife has a pre-existing condition? Do they want leaders who are going to fight to make college free in this country because they themselves are dealing with hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans? Do they want leaders who are going to lead with peace and not prop up war profiteering companies because they know what it's like when the sound of a bullet flies past your head? This is what the choice is in this election. On June 23rd, we can change the message. We can turn the corner. 14 years of stagnant leadership has led us to where we are now. It is not working. We don't need to talk about this 5 years from now. Martin Luther King said the time to do what's right is always now. That's the type of leadership Central Brooklyn deserves. That's the type of leadership I'll provide. Thank you for your time tonight. Vote for Isiah James, June 20th.
And Mr. Bunkedekko, over to you.
I want to thank Ben. I want to thank everyone who helped organize this debate and conversation. Look, it is really clear. It's why I ran in 2018. It's why I'm running right now. We have someone in Congress who seems to believe that we have to react to certain things when they happen. She called at the last debate 2 bad apples. As a Black man who grew up in this city, who knows folks who went to Rikers, who knows folks who've been profiled, who's been profiled himself, it's not about bad apples. It's about changing the culture of policing, not only in this city, but in this country. And we are at a tipping point. I'm exhausted. I'm not even angry. I'm not even fed up. I'm exhausted. My family is exhausted. My community is exhausted. This entire district is exhausted. And it's exhausted because policing reform is just at the tip of the iceberg of what needs to be changing in this district. We've had a congressperson for the last decade not do anything and only get a primary in 2018 where she was scared almost out of her job to now realize, oh, I ought to start being more attuned to what's going on in our community. That's being out of touch. And we don't need that right now. We need folks who have been on the ground doing the work in this community. And that's the kind of work that we need to get done in Washington. The choice is very clear. And in 2018, the choice was very clear then. And it's very clear now. We need to turn the page if we're going to have better housing in this community, if we're going to turn the page on education, if we're going to turn the page on criminal justice, all of the issues that have affected Black and brown folks, the same folks I have grown up with, the same folks I have worked my tail off for the last decade trying to help in this community. They deserve that. They deserve someone who's going to work just like they do.
Go over to Ms. Clarke for closing statement, and everybody who's watching, stick around for 1 minute after Ms. Clarke for a closing goodbye. But Ms. Clarke, you've had some things thrown at you in the closing statements here, so I guess fittingly you get to respond and give your closing statement. Oh, unmute.
Sorry about that. Let me just start by thanking the South Central Brooklyn Democrats and PAYA for having us this evening. It is really important that we stay focused right now. You know, leadership and experience makes a whole heck of a lot of difference. And I have been focused from day one like a laser on the needs, the wants, the desires, and the fight that needs to be taken to Washington, D.C. to deliver for this community. And I continue to do so. It's not time for on-the-job training. I think this evening's debate really pointed out that some of my opponents really need to find out what the federal government does and what the responsibility of a congressperson is. And yes, I am I do reimagine, right? I'm left-handed. Right? So I am creating new legislation each and every week. I've passed 2 bills in the House on climate change. And that was inspired by a group of young people in our community who came to visit with me. And I think Mr. James might have been amongst them that wanted me to pass the New Green Deal. Not only did I become a co-sponsor of the New Green Deal, but I joined Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in putting into the New Green Deal all of the economic justice and racial inclusive wording for that legislation that was introduced. I'm inspired by the people of this district to do the work that needs to be done. My work is not done. I'm all gassed up because you know what? We're about to get the breakthrough and my leadership is in the right place at the right time. I ask for your support. I ask for your vote. I'm Congresswoman Yvette Clarke of the 9th Congressional District of New York.
Thank you. So that is well done, candidates. Thank you very much for your participation here tonight. I want to thank the South Central Brooklyn United for Progress, the Pakistani American Youth Society, the Brooklyn Movement Center, and Greater Prospect Heights Mutual Aid, and of course, those organizations, representatives that did such a great job crafting questions and asking them, and we thank you, candidates, for addressing those. We obviously could not get to a number of issues, but you're having other debates, you're making appearances, and hopefully you'll be reaching out to all these communities.
And I will be headed to Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the host organizations for having me. Again, you can find our work at GothamGazette.com. Thank you all who have watched tonight. Thank you everybody who's going to go out and vote. A reminder, primary day is June 23rd. Early voting is June 13th through the 21st. And everybody is eligible for absentee voting due to a gubernatorial order and the pandemic that we all know we're still dealing with here in New York. Please vote, and good night, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.